Welcome to our discussion video for the intangible assets in government accounting. So at the end of this discussion video, we will look at defining the intangible assets, stating the recognition and account for the initial and subsequent measurements of intangible assets. So in government accounting, medyo rare yung items such as intangible assets. So meron lang mga iilang government agencies that has these account titles. Especially those that are related to science, yung mga nasa DOST, Department of Health. So, sila normally yung nagme-maintain ng mga ganitong klaseng intangible assets. So there are essential elements of the intangible assets which are already introduced to you in your financial accounting. Yung essential elements ng intangible assets is the same kapag tiningnan mo yung Philippine Public Sector Accounting Standards. One is the identifiability. So, we say that yung isang intangible asset is said to be identifiable kapag yan ay may dalawang component. One is, it is separable. So, ibig sabihin, pwede mo siyang ihiwalay doon sa kung saan man naka-attach or kung saan man related yung intangible assets na yun, and it can be sold separately, it can be divided, it can be licensed separately. So meron siyang separable component. Another one, bago mo masasabi na yan ay identifiable, is that it arises from binding arrangements. Ibig sabihin, it arises from binding arrangements. There are documentation to prove that itong intangible assets na ito are really of legal rights para ma-transfer mo yan eventually. Since you are looking at a government entity, dapat lahat yan ay documented through contracts, through approval in the intellectual property offices. So yun yung concept ng identifiability when we relate it to government accounting. Next is control. When in layman's term, when we say control, the entity or the government agency na nag-recognize ng intangible asset na yan has the sole authority to control the use of this intangible asset. So, paano natin ma-identify yung control kapag yan ay registered in the intellectual property office? Okay? So, control of an intangible asset normally arises from legal rights that are enforceable in a court of law. So, you cannot enforce the use or control a particular intangible asset kung hindi yan nakaregister. So, yun yung concept ng controllability sa government agency. Next, there are future economic benefits or service potential. Okay, this is self-comprehensible. There are benefits that are foreseen to be earned in the use of these intangible assets. So there are examples na normally ginagamit in government accounting. One is the computer software, next patents, copyrights, franchise, motion picture films, trademarks, brand names, licenses, acquired import quotas, list of users of a service, and relationships with users of a service. So ito yung mga examples ng common examples ng intangible assets in government accounting. So you can look at it one by one in the government accounting manual. So makikita mo naman doon kung kailan ginagamit yung terminology na computer software, yung franchise, yung motion picture films, trademarks, copyrights, and among others. Okay, let's look at how the intangibles are initially measured. So according to the government accounting manual, it should be at cost. So at cost mo siya. Kung magkano mo siya binili, doon mo i-recognize yung initial measurement ng intangible. So, there is, however, a provision. The measurement of the cost depends on the mode of acquisition, and this is similar to the rules on PPE and the investment property na diniscuss natin in our earlier discussion videos. Kung matatandaan mo, di ba sinasabi doon kapag ang mode of acquisition is purchase, ganito ang measurement ng initial cost is the purchase price plus the direct cost. Kapag the payment is deferred or hindi natin ma-identify din yung purchase price on that, the cost is the cash price equivalent. If the acquisition is through a non-exchange transaction, you look at the fair value at the acquisition date. So this is similar. Yung ganitong klaseng analysis on the measurement of cost depending on the mode of acquisition is also applied in intangible assets. So kapag exchange naman between two government agencies, for example, kailangan nating tingnan, di ba, kung it is with commercial or without commercial substance. So I will not be discussing that because this is same lang doon sa kung paano mo siya ginawa on your property, plant and equipment and investment property rules. Okay. There is a dilemma, however, in the intangible assets wherein when the intangibles are internally generated. So what does internally generated intangibles mean? In government, normal yung internally generated ang ating intangible assets, especially yung mga scientific innovations, discovery and inventions. Yan ay mga intangible assets na ginagawa, for example sa DOST, sa mga science related sa, for example, sa PhilRise, sa Philippine Carabao Center. So itong mga science related CLS also can have one. Ibig sabihin, the intangible assets are not acquired but are internally generated. So mayroon tayong tinatawag na yung consideration on when anong cost ang i-identify natin to capitalize the cost of that intangible asset. Okay? So, according to the Government Accounting Manual, we have to look on the phase. So, there are two phases on the internal generation of an intangible assets. One is the research phase and the other is the development phase. So, ang sinasabi, all expenditures related under the research phase are expense. So, recognized as an expense on the period when it is incurred. So, anong mga klaseng expenses ba ang related dyan? So, examples are all those activities aimed at obtaining new knowledge. Kumbaga, on the initial phases, di ba, kumukuha ka pa lang ng information related dun sa pag-generate mo ng intangible assets. So, i-expense natin yon, such as also the search for, evaluation, and final selection of applications of research findings or knowledge, the search for alternatives for materials, devices, products, processes, systems, or services, the formulation, design, evaluation, and final selection of possible alternatives. Kasi diba, during this phase, gumagawa ka ng trial and error, laboratory testing, and many other types of activities na related dun sa research activities. So kapag ganun, lahat daw yon will be recognized as an expense. Please take note of that. However, under the development phase, in which this phase is considered as a phase before the start of the real commercial production or use, yung mismong phase bago natin siya ilagay doon sa production, commercial production or commercial use. So all those expenditures are capitalized. So therefore, it is critical for us to determine when the related activity is under the research phase or the development phase. Kasi kung mamamali ka diyan, mamali na yung value o yung cost na i-consider mo sa yung intangible asset. Okay, so what are the items related to the development phase? So it is said that the development phase expenses are expenditures are capitalized if the entity can demonstrate conditions such as this. You can refer to page 293 for the listing of these items. One, the technical feasibility of completing the intangible asset. So, ibig sabihin, highly feasible na makomplete na yung intangible asset because based on technicalities, okay siya. The intention to complete the intangible asset, kasi po pwede na merong technical feasibility pero in-stop yung development. So kapag ganun, hindi natin yun pwedeng i-capitalize because there is a condition, there is no intention to complete naman pala. C, ability to use or sell the intangible asset. So it should be determined. The probable future economic benefits or service potential, the availability of adequate resources needed to complete the development of that asset, and the reliable measurement of the cost of the intangible asset. So please be mindful of this because normally kapag mga ganitong enumeration during the SIPALE, it will be a theoretical or conceptual questions. So ganyan ang so kailangan hindi you don't really need to memorize yung mga ganitong klaseng enumerations but for you to understand and to comprehend yung reason kung bakit ganon. Okay? Kasi hindi naman yan i-enumerate isa-isa during the CPA board exam, but it is for you to understand kung bakit kailangang, for example, yung item B, yung intention to complete the intangible asset, as I have discussed kanina, 'di ba? Kahit na may technical feasibility, kung wala namang intention to complete the asset, then i-expense mo yan, wag mo i-capitalize. Kasi hininto mo naman pala yung development phase. Okay. There are special items that will rules that will guide us in identifying these cases of internally generated intangibles. One is if there is doubt whether the expenditure relates to research or development cost, it shall be a research cost, hence expense. So kung hindi ma-identify o sinasabi sa problem that particular cost or expenditure or an activity is it is not clear kung yun ay nasa research or phase or development phase, i-recognize natin yun as an expense. I-expense mo na lang. Kumbaga, yung 'di ba there is a rule on that kung yung less onerous, ang less burdensome on the company ang gamitin natin kapag hindi klaro. Yung less onerous. And in this case, the less onerous is that you expense. Mas conservative na i-expense mo na lang yon than capitalizing the cost. Okay? Costs previously charged as expenses cannot be subsequently capitalized. On the prior period, chinarge mo as expenses, pero on the succeeding period, na-realize mo upon your analysis that it shall be capitalized. Could you subsequently capitalize this? No. Okay? Uh, yung mga succeeding items na kagaya noon, pwede mong i-capitalize but once you already have charges it as an expense, i-charge mo yon as an expense. Wag mo nang i-adjust or i-revert yung entry related doon but hayaan na natin doon siya sa expenses because what effect would this entail on the recording of your intangible assets if you capitalize this? Kasi kung i-capitalize mo yan ngayon, remember, you are also doing accumulated amortization on your intangible assets. So, saan mo pa ilalagay yung amortization ng expense na nangyari a year ago? 'Di ba? Magugulo yung recording ng intangible assets mo diyan. Kaya the rule is that costs previously charged as expenses cannot be subsequently capitalized. Next, inefficiencies are expense. Selling, administrative, and other general overhead costs of efficiencies, initial operating losses, and training costs are expense and shall not form part of the cost of an intangible assets. We already know this, 'di ba? Laging sinasabi, negligence is never capitalized. Okay? Okay, we look at the subsequent measurement of an intangible kasi tapos na tayo sa initial measurement. Maigsi lang itong discussion on intangible assets. Okay? The subsequent measurement is still at cost, but we will consider now yung any accumulated amortization and any accumulated impairment losses. So at cost less any of that. For example, bumili ka ng computer software. How do you recognize? You just have to debit computer software and then credit cash MDS regular 1 million. Of course, this is a simple illustration kasi meron pang tax yan. Kasi kung bibili ka ng software na ganyan, normally merong tax na kaakibat. But for simplicity of our discussion, uh, computer software cash MDS regular. So kung may tax due to BIR ka dito, bawasan mo yung 1 million na yan. Okay? Okay. For the amortization, we assume that the software's useful life is 5 years. So 1 million divided by 5 years. For the first year, you debit amortization intangible assets and then credit accumulated amortization computer software 200,000. So kung titingnan mo dyan, yung amortization ay all encompassing yung intangible assets. Pero yung accumulated amortization nakadetalye sa computer software. So kung papansinin mo yung account titles na nandoon sa revised chart of accounts, mapapansin mo na intangible assets kasi yung ginagamit. Okay? Hindi na niya in-specify yung details. Okay, so 1 million divided by 5, so that is 200,000. So what happens when there are the recoverable amount now is lower than the carrying amount? Magkano na ang carrying amount ngayon? 800,000. That is 1 million kanina, 'di ba? 1 million kanina minus the accumulated amortization 200, that is 800,000 na lang. Ang sabi, paano kapag ang naging recoverable amount on the third year, for example, ay 700,000 na lang? So, ibig sabihin, kailangan i-adjust mo. Nag-impair yung iyong intangible asset. So, how do you recognize? Debit impairment loss, intangible asset, credit. Accumulated impairment losses, computer software, 100,000. Kasi nga, 700 yung RA, yung recoverable amount, at 800 yung carrying amount. Kapag ganyan, ibig sabihin, yung dating 800, ang value na lang ngayon is 700,000. Next, what if you have the government agency decided to sell the computer software for 700,000? 720,000 pala. So, for 720,000. So, remember, ang recoverable amount mo dito ay 700. So, ito na rin yung balance ng iyong intangible assets, di ba? Kung ibebenta mo yan ng 720,000, so therefore, debit ka lang ng 720,000 kung binayaran ka through, kung na-receive mo na yung payment, and then i-eliminate mo lahat noong mga contra accounts. Accumulated amortization, 200,000. Accumulated impairment losses, 100,000. Then, alisin na natin sa libro yung computer software, 1 million. So, may balancing figure kang 20,000. Okay? Kaya yun yung gain on sale of the intangible asset. Kasi 720, ito ang value ng intangible mo kanina ay 700 na lang. So, meron kang gain on sale of the intangible asset na 20,000. Okay. So, that is simply the discussion on the intangible assets. Thank you.